Hello, you're watching NewsX and I'm Vaishali Kohli. Now, G20 leaders opened the final day of their South Africa summit with a session dedicated to critical minerals, employment issues and artificial intelligence. Prime Minister Narendra Modi held a bilateral meeting with South African President Cyril Ramaphosa on the sidelines of the G20 Summit, continuing India's extensive diplomatic outreach during the gathering of world leaders. He highlighted the need to adopt integral humanism. He also called for strict restrictions on the use of AI in deepfakes, crime and terror activities. He added that global impact on AI should be based on core principles of human oversight, safety by design and transparency. Meanwhile, tussle between US and South Africa disrupts G20 Presidency handover process and continues to be a major flashpoint. The White House said that South Africa is refusing to facilitate a smooth transition of its presidency of the G20 into the US. The allegation from Washington came after the South African Foreign Ministry said it would hand over the presidency to the US on an appropriate level. Soon after the assertion, the G20 issued a joint declaration on the climate crisis, neglecting the American objection to it. White House spokeswoman Anna Kelly said that South African President Cyril Ramaphosa had pushed to issue a G20 leaders declaration addressing the climate crisis and other global challenges, despite consistent and robust US objections. How will South Africa hand over G20 presidency to the US remains a major question. On the other hand, Prime Minister Modi shared highlights of his ongoing visit to Johannesburg for the G20 summit, describing his discussions and engagements with global leaders as productive. All right, viewers, now of course I have my guest joining me on the broadcast. I have Pramit Pal Chaudhary, who's the South Asia head, Eurasia Group. I have Robinder Sachdev, International Affairs expert. I have Gautam Mukherjee, senior journalist, and Ambassador Veena Sikri, former diplomat, on the broadcast. With me at the moment, I'd like to go across to Pramit Pal Chaudhary to begin with. Now, Mr. Chaudhary, now we're going to be breaking down, now I want to break down for my viewers the 6 new G20-led initiatives by PM Modi. And let's begin with a very, very important point here, which is that an urgent and coordinated action has been called by Prime Minister Modi to overcome the challenge of drug trafficking. I'd like your opening comments.
Well, I think this is something that India has been consistently concerned about, and it's also one of those kind of issues that tends to get ignored or sidelined at major international meetings, which is basically drug trafficking. In addition, drug trafficking is also tied very closely with terrorism, especially in the South Asian region. We know that the AFPAC region has been a primary source of drug trafficking. Drug trafficking has also been used by terrorist groups to fund their activities. So in effect, going after drugs is not only tackling a domestic problem, which is a major problem in some parts of India. Punjab, for example, has been ravaged by drug smuggling that's come over from the border from Pakistan. We have problems coming out of Myanmar of heroin trafficking entering the northeast. But it also basically cuts off one of the sources for terrorist funding that is used by a number of organizations.
All right, I want to now go across to Mr. Robinder Sachdev, who's an international affairs expert. Now, Mr. Sachdev, PM Modi has also spoken about the G20 Africa Skills Multiply Initiative to, of course, facilitate the country's workforce transformation. What do you have to say for that?
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you and your eminent colleagues. No, absolutely. I think, see, development comes oftentimes through, mundane issues of nuts and bolts which have to be done. And skill development might sound, mundane and nothing glamorous to it, but that is extremely important. And Africa, with its young population, and the initiative is a multiplier initiative, right? Train the trainer, which is a typical methodology to, to maximize or to have a network effect so that you can generate more trainers so that the skill trainings can percolate down. So that is without doubt, an extremely important area of focus, I would say.
I'd like to go across now to Gautam Mukherjee, senior journalist. Now, Mr. Mukherjee, a very important point here is that, Trump has ordered a boycott of the summit over claims that South Africa, of course, is pursuing racist and anti-white policies. What do you have to say for that?
I have all along said that this is a bit of a canard. I don't know what business it is of the United States to raise this to this level, where it boycotts a G20 summit over it. There are, issues of most of the land being owned by white people who are objecting to any form of redistribution. This was set up during the apartheid years, and that is long gone, and social justice in many countries, including ours, has resulted in some degree of reallocation, the end of zamindaris and such like. And it is important for America under Trump to realize that these are issues that confront a given country, and they should be viewed with some degree of understanding and not broad brush, appeals to either his MAGA base or to white supremacy or things of that order. This is rather silly. But then Trump is famous for making silly comments.
Ambassador Veena Sikri, former diplomat, is with me on the broadcast as well. And Ambassador Sikri, I want to also talk to you about this because this is a very important point that's being discussed globally. I mean, of course, the White House has said that South African President Ramaphosa was refusing to facilitate a smooth transition of the G20 presidency. I'd like your comments.
Yeah, well, I think that the fact that the USA decided to boycott this particular summit is rankling with all those who are present. But it's very surprising and positive and a good sign of the resilience of the G20 that they have gone ahead and they've even adopted, very substantive joint declaration with more than 120 paragraphs. And they have even opined on issues like climate change, which they know that, the American president has a different opinion on. So I think the G20 has shown its determination to move ahead as a group and the importance of being together as a group. Now, of course, the complicating factor is that the next presidency of the G20 goes to the USA. And it is the tradition and the custom in the G20 that on the final session of the summit, the baton is handed over, the gavel or the baton is handed over to the representative of the US government. And that should have been so, and one would have expected that even if there were if the president was unable to attend, then first there was talk the vice president would attend, and then after that there was talk that nobody would attend. And for the handing over, they wanted the South African president to hand it over to the CDA, the Charge d'Affaires of the American embassy in Pretoria. And this was not acceptable to the president of South Africa. And he has found a way out. I think that's very dignified and a proper decision that he has taken. He has said that on the next working day, which is tomorrow, since the Charge d'Affaires is ready to receive the gavel and the baton, this will be given to him by a diplomatic officer of the South African government of an appropriate level. So they will find an officer from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or maybe the President's office of that appropriate level and hand over the baton to him. I think this is now being done tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken, but there's been no formal announcement. So I think this is a fair decision, and it shows that, the dignity and respect. This was the very first time that the G20 summit is being held on the African continent. And we all know that in 2023, when India had the chairmanship of G27, we were very keen and were successful in getting the admission of the African Union as the 21st member of the G20. And this has been a matter of great pride for all the countries of Africa. They're very proud of their membership, and they'd like to have this membership to help them in economic development, in supply chain development, in resilience in, if there are setbacks in trade, resilience in obtaining commodities. And of course, for South Africa, the most important issue is obtaining fair prices for their own natural resources, which are available in huge abundance in Africa, whether it is gold or critical minerals and so on. But very often, while the mining is done by other countries, the return to the country of Africa where the mines are located is far from adequate. So this has always been a problem with them. I think one of the important decisions of this summit was our Prime Minister's suggestion on the skills empowerment initiative for the African Union, for all the countries of Africa. And our Prime Minister has spelled out a very detailed, train the trainers initiative, and hopefully within the next few years there could be as many as 1 million train the trainers across all countries to pass on the skills development experience to the young generation in Africa, so that they don't have to then rush out of Africa. The emigration is such a huge issue. People are spending huge amounts of money and losing their lives in the process of emigration, and we hope that if they are to have the skills development there, they will be able to find a good life. And very, very important initiatives in addition to this one, on the global healthcare response. The Global Health Response Initiative, which is in post-COVID, it's a very important issue for the G20 to play a big role in this. The Traditional Knowledge Initiative, where India attaches the highest importance to our traditional knowledge systems, and we've now called for a global repository of traditional knowledge. So I think these very important initiatives that our Prime Minister has taken. The drug terror nexus is a vital one that Prime Minister has focused on, and we really hope that this drug terror nexus will be brought together. We are seeing in our own country how from Pakistan every day through drones, drugs or weapons, and the combination of the two combined with terrorist initiatives and the terrorists coming across or sending them through drones, it's really disruptive and very, very creating a lot of social instability in some of the bordering states in India. So I think this is a very important initiative to flag at the global level. It's been a very successful summit. Our Prime Minister has been extremely well received and has had important meetings with leaders. This initiative, the Australia-Canada initiative on technology, has been really being spoken about in a very big way in the global media, and I think it's attracted a lot of attention. There was also the India, Brazil, South Africa trilateral meeting, which is another IBSA, another standalone initiative which has been gaining strength and moving ahead from time to time. So these bilateral, multilateral, trilateral, multilateral and regional initiatives are a great spin-off of the summit meeting like the G20.
Ambassador Sikri, I want your comments on one more very important point, and then I'll go across to the rest of my guests. Now, Ukraine is in focus, but definitely on the sidelines. Now, Ukraine was only mentioned once in the 30-page declaration in the context of addressing major global conflicts. How do you see that?
I think that always how to include the reference to Ukraine for the last 3 years has been an issue that will be acceptable to all the countries present, which include, of course, the USA, Russia, China, the European Union, European countries, and it's always been a little tense initiative. But this time they decided to just have a specific reference saying that that we do not accept the use of force or the threat of the use of force, and saying that all countries must ensure that the threat of force or the use of force is not encouraged in any way in international relations. Other than that, they've decided not to speak either about the Ukraine peace plan which is now being discussed, or about the Gaza peace plan as well. So on both these important issues relating to global security and issues causing global tensions for the last 3 years and more, I think that the G20 decided, since I think because the USA was not there either to negotiate or to give their views, it could have been a big embarrassing situation that you say something and then America says, look, I don't like this or whatever. It could have been an embarrassing moment. I think they have managed it quite well. They have raised the issues without referring to any specific countries, and they know that on the Ukraine peace plan there is an ongoing discussion. Even the European Union allies, the European countries, have a different point of view from President Trump. So that's another, difference of opinion to tackle. And so given all these differences among those who are present and not present at the G20, I think they papered over it quite well.
All right. Now I'd like to go across to Mr. Pramit Pal Chaudhary, who's the South Asia head of Eurasia Group. Now, Mr. Chaudhary, what's very interesting to note with the G20 summit is, of course, the US President Donald Trump's 28-point peace plan, which I quote unquote is being called controversial. Now, it's very interesting, the dynamic between Zelensky and Trump. Do you think that this peace plan will be successful?
Well, they've already said that this is a draft agreement, so we can expect further negotiations to take place. Ukraine obviously has some concerns about the amount of territory that it will have to concede. NATO, Europe will be concerned about the lack of a security guarantee for Ukraine. And Trump's form of negotiation is somewhat unusual. Rather than having everybody sit at a table and work it out and try to find convergences, he basically dictates points and then tries to force both sides to the table. That's one of the reasons he's after India to stop buying Russian oil, because he doesn't have too much leverage with Putin. Zelensky, obviously, America has enormous leverage because he depends on America for a lot of his weapon systems, and particularly for a lot of the intelligence that the Ukrainian army uses in its fight with Russia. But this will drag on for a while. The Americans have already admitted this will be a draft agreement. But this broad, I think what we've seen in these points is going to be the core of a future ceasefire. When that happens, however, is uncertain, but I suspect it will not be for several more months.
Now, Mr. Robinder Sachdev, International Affairs expert, is with me. Now, Mr. Sachdev, how do you feel about the emphasis on the critical minerals framework that's being laid at the G20 summit?
Well, critical minerals and rare earths seem to be, not being, facetious, but the flavor of the day and the focus of the day and the jargon of the year kind of a thing right now. Everybody seems to have woken up and realized that, it's like a gold rush happening right now in terms of countries realizing that how critical these critical minerals are and the rare earths are in various, in various industries, especially, be it automotive, be it defense and all. And the grip of China on this supply chain was known, but has suddenly come more into play and notice. So critical minerals and rare earths, I think right now each country is kind of trying to, tie up sources or, set up their supply chains. Even India is doing. And all countries are looking to maybe go out and figure out where there are two things which countries are doing. One, within their own country, they're trying to exploit and search and find out. And secondly, wherever there are no sources or resources, countries are trying to lock them in for themselves. So that seems to be very much happening. If you see America, we're talking about Ukraine. I think we are maybe, it's there, but remember the $500 million deal agreement on critical minerals and rare earth, which Zelensky was ultimately forced to sign up. And that was like what, how many, 3-6 months ago, under which a joint US-Ukrainian fund would be set up, and there's a certain process of divvying up the profits and all, but Trump has actually in a way locked in that resource for the US. So this is certainly, an industry of the future, particularly since, your semiconductors, chips and all, and for aerospace industries, and of course, automotive industries, these elements are so critical out there. Quickly coming back to the South Africa Trump thing, I think there is one more issue between Trump and South Africa, Sure, it is about the white Africans and the solidarity with them, but also I think South Africa has been pretty vocal in its let's say stance with respect to Israel, and it has pursued that end very actively and very diligently, and that is something also which the US, I think, especially folks who have deeper interests or who are aligned with Israel in the US do not like at all. So I think that factor has also played in, which resulted in the Trump administration or Trump himself coming around to the view that South Africa is a rogue nation, so to say.
Mr. Gautam Mukherjee, a senior journalist, is also with me. Now, Mr. Mukherjee, the PM, of course, has focused on energy transition and climate action. And he's also said that, innovations such as recycling, urban mining and second life batteries can reduce supply chain pressure and support clean energy goals. Your comments?
Yes, well, as far as recycling goes, it is a method that is increasingly being adopted in India as well, because the rare earth minerals are required in a magnet are several in kind. So even if you do find rare earth deposits, they may have some of those minerals and not others, and then elsewhere there are others and not the ones that are found earlier in maybe in the same country, maybe elsewhere. But what's in a battery achieves two objectives with the same effort. One is recycling itself, that otherwise you've got a massive issue with particularly vehicle batteries, which are massive in size, as to what to do with them. The second thing is, if you extract all these minerals which are ready-made to power such batteries, then that is a process by which you can recover almost 70% of it. The cost is much less. The environmental impact, which otherwise is massive when you mine minerals because of huge water requirements, other pollutants escaping into the soil, etc. All that is, addressed to an extent. So it is certainly worth doing.
Ambassador Veena Sikri, now this year, interestingly also, is the first time the G20 was hosted on the African continent. I'd like your comments on that.
Yeah, well, actually, this is quite a remarkable development, because all these years, the African Union was completely left out of the global developmental process. We know that the UN has been fairly ineffective in that regard. And, individual loans from countries, like even from the US or USAID, it is really more geared to helping the people in America and others. They get more money than actually flows into the country that's receiving it. So, Africa has always been a great problem, and China has been more and more influential in, creating its Belt and Road Initiative and roping in a number of African countries, drawing them into their sphere of influence. You're sending Chinese people ostensibly to work on these projects, but then they stay behind, they marry local. It's created a lot of problems. So I think India's initiative, Prime Minister Modi's initiative in 2023 to insist that the African Union join the G20 as a 21st member was very well received, and we've seen this time the actual positive outcomes of that. They're so happy, and there's a feeling of pride among all African countries that the first ever G20 Summit is being held on African soil. And you can see also from the kind of program that that had been arranged by the President of South Africa. There was a very active social summit held a couple of days before. There was a very active business summit also held to bring together all the business community. And America was quite well represented in the business summit. A lot of leading companies actually arrived in Johannesburg to take part in the business summit, showing their interest. They do recognize the positive interest, the business interest, the business opportunity that is available in Africa. They want to all, counter the Chinese attempt to, gain a complete hold of all the African countries. So all in all, this has been a very interesting aside. And, it's very interesting that today the role of the G20, I mean, they represent, of course, a huge percentage of, global population, global trade, global GDP, percentage of the global GDP. All that is very interesting. But they've come up with, very interesting comparison that this is the 80th year of the United Nations from the time that they were trying to form it, and it's been almost since 1945 that the efforts have been on. But today the UN is not playing a role at all in so many global instances, whether it's the Gaza peace plan or the the Ukraine effort to find a peace plan. None of them you find UN playing an active role. The Gaza peace plan, the Security Council very dutifully voted at the end with 2 abstentions and 13 yes votes. But so the G20 has a very great role to play, and this time we find that more and more the responsibilities of the G20, like to have a global repository of traditional knowledge, to work on the drug terror nexus, all these issues will now come up, and in the implementation, let's see what the USA, who's the next chairperson of the G20, will do about it. Already there has been a statement from the spokesperson of the White House saying, well, we will make the G20 in our own image, what we think it should be. So it's to be seen now what the US intentions and plans are for its chairmanship year of the G20, what kind of initiatives they will sponsor, what kind of programs they will have, because you should recall when India had the chairmanship leading up to the G20 Summit, we had a huge number of working groups on all kinds of very interesting subjects. It was on tourism, on rural tourism, on women, and on trade, and so many issues were covered in those. Now, whether the US intends to go ahead with that is not yet known. So let us see what the US will reveal about its own plans for G20.
All right, and with that, I'd like to thank all my guests for joining me on the broadcast.